have this good sample, right, we really must know the target population, define the target population. Then you must have this sampling frame, as I have said just now, which is a representation of all the population elements, right? So in this research, who are those people, right? The entire population, who are they? Are they, let's say, all the students of UITM Sarawak? Right? So if that is the population, please define it. All the students of UITM Cawangan Sarawak. That is, this research is trying to conclude upon. So if that is the case, then you must have the list of all the students of UITM Cawangan Sarawak, right? Including also the EPJJ students and so on. So once you have the sampling frame or the listing, then you will select the right technique, right? Suitable technique, maybe probability or non-probability sampling, you have to decide. Then you will determine the sample size, right? How many you should select. So you have to determine, then you start selecting, right? Execute the sampling process. So you have to undergo these systematic steps in your sampling design. So later on in your presentation to tell us how you are going to carry out the sampling process, right? And in your proposal, right? So just now we say we must have the right technique. For instance, if it is a non-probability technique, yeah, of course, you can choose to have a convenience sampling technique, right? Whereby you really choose based on convenience, right? Because they are your, let's say, classmates or your, let's say, your church members or your surau members and so on, or your kampong, let's say, same village and so on. So it's based on your convenience. That's why you choose them, right? Or it can be based on your own judgment that these are the appropriate or suitable candidates to be interviewed. So based on your own judgment, I'm sure you can justify, then you choose them, right? Or you can use quota, right? Based on this population and these characteristics, you set quota, how many percent will be chosen from this group of people, right? To meet the quota, right? And you can use this snowball sampling technique, whereby you use this referral process, right? As you interview, let's say this few, then you ask this few to recommend some more for you to interview, right? So these are some of the non-probably sampling technique, like just like I said, convenience sampling, judgmental sampling, and quota sampling, which is commonly used, especially for this qualitative research, whereby the information is not, let's say, conclusive. It's for your initial investigation of the problem. So you can use quota using certain control characteristics like gender or location. If you really want to understand, let's say, the consumer behaviors, for instance, right? For the urban and rural people, for example. So you can use this urban, rural, male and female. So a few characteristics whereby you can really conveniently use to represent these various groups of people, right? For instance, you just set standardized quota of 10% across these different categories of control characteristics. But a lot of time we want it to be proportionate to the population size, right? For instance, like this, proportionate to the population characteristics. So you as a researcher, you have to know the population characteristics first. Let's say your control characteristics is gender. So you must know how many of them male or how many of them female, right? And then how many percent of them actually in the population, the actual population, right? Of course, through these secondary data or certain reports or government, let's say, documents, you can know roughly, right? And location, roughly how many of them actually urban and so on. And then how is the percentage? So from the percentage of the population, then you will select accordingly. Let's say if you want 500, that means 57 must be female, right? And 43% must be male. So you have these population characteristics and the ratio, and then you meet the quota. Okay, and exactly how you select this, let's say 290, that is depending on you. You again can use the convenience sampling selection technique just now, either convenience sampling or can be this judgmental sampling. But at least you know already, you have quota to meet, right? The number to meet. Exactly how do you select? It can be convenience, it can be judgmental, right? Or purposive. Okay, so there is quota sampling. Of course, just now we say this snowball sampling is, of course, sometimes you don't know who to select, you know, who they are, but you know initially a few, right? For instance, you want to really investigate the consumer behavior or spending behavior of, let's say, these smokers, for instance. You don't really know who the smokers are. You don't have a list, but you know who they are, a few, your friends and colleagues and so on. So you interview those few and then ask those few to recommend some more for you to interview, right? So there is going through rounds of referral processes until you have the number that you want, or until you reach a, let's say, saturation point, whereby as you interview, the answers are more or less the same. So you know already it's already up to the saturation point, right? So you can see these are the non-probability sampling technique. That is suitable for qualitative research, right? Yeah. But for this quantitative and conclusive research, right? Conclusive research, maybe qualitative or quantitative, right? Sometimes qualitative research is also conclusive, and then you want to be very careful, right? So if it is a conclusive research, final, the information is final for decision making, then you really like to recommend for this probability sampling technique. Okay, if you are using mixed method, qualitative may be non-probability, then quantitative will be probability sampling technique, right? So you can either use a simple random or systematic or stratified or this cluster sampling. So please read up on all these simple random sampling technique. You must have a sampling frame, and every element must be having the number. Then you will, let's say, know the sample size and select. For instance, you even can have this random number table, right? So that you will select the number randomly, right? Following, let's say, the gap of how many, right? Using the random number table. Or sometimes you can use computer to generate the numbers, right? So for instance, here these are stratified by, let's say, sector. So for construction sector, what are the numbers will be selected? The numbers will be generated from the random number table, right? Or it is very common that we use systematic sampling, right? Whereby again, you have the sampling frame, given the number for every element, then you calculate the interval, right? The sample size divided by the population size, you have an interval, right? Then you will select based on the intervals, right? So same goes to this stratified sampling. You will have different strata. Again, from each and every strata, you will select randomly. Or it is a cluster sampling. Sometimes people just divide the population into areas. So they use this area sampling, geographical area. So for each and every cluster, you have numbers and then select randomly from that particular cluster, right? Sometimes it can be a multi-stage cluster. Yeah. So you can see there are various techniques that we can choose from. And of course, you have other techniques like sequential sampling, double sampling, and so on. And of course, there are other techniques that you can learn. So which one to choose? It depends on the nature of your research, for exploratory or for conclusive. Exploratory stage, a lot of times we will use non-probability sampling technique. And probability technique, this technique will be used for conclusive study, as I have said just now. So the sample size determination is always the issue, right? Sometimes we use rule of thumb. You can read up this article from Roscoe, right? It is, let's say, common 30 to 500 for most research, right? The interviews, let's say we use 30 and so on, right? Or 10 times of the number of variables. If you have, let's say, 10 variables, that means you must have at least, let's say, 100, right? And of course, this table of Cressy and Morgan is commonly referred to. If you have this population size, this is the probable sample size that you can use. So you can look for this journal article. Or you can use this statistical method using mean approach. If you were to use this mean approach, there's a formula here, right? I think some of your colleagues also have shared this formula, whereby you need, let's say, the variance and also the Z value divided by the precision level to determine the sample size. Same goes to if the parameter is proportion. If your analysis is in proportion, percentage, right? That means you can use this formula. Or some people will use this G power, right? Yeah. So you can see that there are various techniques that you can use. But if you were to use statistical technique, a lot of times, of course, you must have these statistics, right? So without these statistics, how can you conclude, right? How can you calculate? So you really need the pilot study, right? For example, you have a pilot study based on, let's say, 60 people or 100 people. Then from there, you get the standard deviation, right? Or the variance.